Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Western and Southern Area Planning Committee on Thursday, the 4th of September, 2025. For the benefit of the public attending today or watching on the live stream, I'm Councillor Bolwell, Chair of this committee. My Vice Chair is Councillor Isenk. The meeting is being live streamed and will be available to view on the Council website after the meeting. And by attending this meeting, you consent to being filmed. Can I remind everyone that when you're speaking, please speak directly into the microphones so that you can be clearly heard and seen. The Planning Committee is not a public meeting, but a meeting to which the public is invited. All attendees must comply with the ruling of the Chair. They must not interrupt the meeting or cause undue disturbance. To support this, please switch off your mobile phones or select silent mode for the duration of the meeting. And those using Teams, please ensure microphones are on mute and that your device volume is set to 0 to maintain audio quality. Only those who have registered to speak in accordance with the speaking protocol will be invited to address the committee for a maximum of 3 minutes. That will be limited to the first 3 people objecting to and the first 3 people supporting the application to have registered, along with the Parish Council and Ward Member. No material is to be circulated to members of the committee. We have 2 applications to determine today. The case officer will be invited to present the report and recommendations. Next, I will invite members of the public who have registered to speak with the Democratic Services Officer before the deadline to address the committee in the following order: public against, public support, the applicant or agent, the town or parish council, and ward members. Each speaker has a maximum of 3 minutes. Following on from the registered public speakers, the planning officers will have the opportunity to address any salient points they wish to clarify, and committee members will then be given the opportunity to ask technical questions of the planning officers. When questions from members have finished, I will move the committee on to debate the application. When we go into councillor questions and debate, for the benefit of the public watching, can the members state their name and ward when addressing the meeting? And please remember to face the chair when speaking to ensure the microphones can pick up your voice. I will now conduct a roll call of members. Councillor Belinda Borden. Good morning, Belinda. Councillor Matt Bell. Good morning, Matt. Councillor Simon Christopher. Good morning, Simon. Councillor Paul Kimber. Councillor David Northam. Good morning, David. Councillor Louis O'Leary. Morning, Louis. Councillor Pete Roper. Morning, Pete. Councillor David Shortell. Thank you very much. Apologies, Josh, could you check them for me, please?
Thank you. Yes, so we've received apologies today from Councillor Craig Monks and Councillor Kate Weller, but I believe she will be joining us online.
Thank you for that, Josh. I will now introduce officers in today's meeting. Anne Collins, Development Manager, Area Manager. Hannah Massey, Lawyer, Regulatory. Matthew Pochin-Hawkes, Lead Project Officer. Steve Tapscott, Senior Planning Officer. And Josh Kennedy, Democratic Services Officer. And Louis Wicks, Democratic Services Officer Apprentice. Now moving on to declarations of interest. Can I firstly remind members if, after seeing the agenda, they have any questions regarding the declarations of interest, that they should consult our legal team prior to the meeting to avoid any uncertainty of their position. Are there any declarations of interest, please? Councillor Matt Bell. We have a microphone malfunction. Just bear with, please.
Thank you. Councillor Matt Bell, Radipole Ward, 3rd time lucky. I will have to step away from the debate for item 5 about Weymouth Harbour due to having voted on the item at a previous Weymouth Town Council Planning and Advisory Committee in November 24.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bell. If you can leave the chamber, that would be wonderful. We'll call you back in before the next item. Minutes, to agree and sign the minutes of the last meeting. Are members happy that the minutes are a true record of the meeting held on Thursday, the 17th of July, 2025? All those in favour, raise their hands. Everyone's in favour. Thank you very much. I'll sign them at a later date after the meeting. Public participation. Members of the public registered to speak can be given the opportunity to speak now if they wish, or wait for their item to be presented. So you're happy to wait till the item's presented, yes?
I'll wait till that item, please.
Lovely, thank you very much. In that case, planning applications. Before we move to item 5, I need to point out that this item has already been before this committee on 2 occasions, January and February 2025. To avoid repetition of a lengthy presentation, we have asked those who were not present at either of the 2 meetings to watch the recordings of the meetings they have missed. Could those members please confirm they have watched the recordings and are happy they are aware of the salient points? If any member has not been able to watch the recordings, then they would not be able to take part in the debate or vote on item 5. And for clarity, we'll need to move to the public section of the seating for the duration of item 5. Councillor Shortell.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor David Shortell, Westmoreland Three-Legged Cross. I was present at the January meeting, but unfortunately I was in the Caribbean in February, and so I was unable to read those notes. So I will preclude myself and sit over there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Shortell. That's correct. If you could do that for us, please, now. We have Councillor Borden, please.
Oh, God, this is testing my shoulder. Yes, so I was absent at the January meeting, but I watched the video recording last night.
That's lovely. Thank you. So you may stay and take part in the debate. Councillor Northam, please. Thank you, Councillor Northam. So you won't take part in the debate or vote. Councillor O'Leary, you've raised your hand.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I was not present for the July meeting, but I did enjoy watching the video last night after EastEnders. It was a very thrilling watch, so I feel I can take part in the debate.
That's lovely. Thank you. And with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 members, we are quorate. So in that case, we would do the short presentation, please. Matthew, over to you. There are no public speakers, by the way, on this one.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so yeah, this application has been to Planning Committee twice in January and February. It's a planning application by Dorset Council. It's for replacement and strengthening of harbour walls F and G, which are the walls to the north and east at Weymouth Peninsula. The resolution at the most recent meeting was to approve subject to conditions, and also receiving written confirmation from the MMO, the Marine Management Organisation, that the parallel marine licensing application would secure appropriate ecological mitigation and compensation. We haven't received that confirmation yet. The marine licence application is still ongoing, and that's why we're back at Planning Committee today to look at the application and, at the applicant's request, remove that part of the resolution. So here's the presentation. It's just an overview of the proposals. So this is the site. It includes a section of the north and east walls here along the peninsula to the north of the pavilion. It also includes public open space just around here and parts of the access and car parks in this area. This is an aerial view. As you can see, the majority of the site is hard standing. There are some planters in this area of the site where you've got the open space and the anchor, and you've also got the inclusion of a small part of the beach. Maybe a bit of a complicated plan, but it tries to show the relationship between the planning application and the marine licensing application with these 3 different colours. So essentially what's shown in green is all of the land plus a short section of the beach. That is all subject to this planning application that we're talking about today. works below the mean low water mark essentially is the sea, and that is shown in blue. All of the part of the application within that area is entirely within the MMO's jurisdiction. So there's no planning controls in that area, and the planning application doesn't include that part of the development. And then there is a small section here shown in yellow, which is essentially the bit between the high and low tides on the beach, which falls within both the jurisdiction of the MMO and the local planning authority. So the request for decoupling of the planning and marine licensing application, it's set out in the report in detail, but in summary, as I mentioned, the resolution at the February committee was to approve, subject to conditions and receiving written confirmation from the MMO, that the parallel marine licensing application would secure appropriate ecological mitigation and compensation. The confirmation from the MMO remains outstanding, and the licensing application is undetermined. And that's been delayed for some time, and the MMO has asked that the applicant, Dorset Council, undertakes further surveys whilst that licence is ongoing. And due to the delays, the applicant has asked that the planning and marine licensing applications are essentially decoupled so that they can get a planning permission and discharge the pre-commencement conditions, which would allow them an earlier start on site, because they wouldn't need to wait for those. They could clear the conditions while the marine licence is pending, subject to your recommendation resolution today. So the applicant advises they wouldn't actually start the works on site until the marine licence has been granted. And that's because the piling works are programmed to go from west to east, so from the beach around to Weymouth Peninsula, and that needs to be continuous for kind of construction programming reasons. So the first section of that is entirely within the planning application, but the majority is entirely within the sea, which is in the Marine Management Organisation's jurisdiction. So to consider this decoupling, as officers, we've done a targeted reconsultation of those parties which we thought would be affected by this or may have comments on this. Natural England, they didn't provide any comments. The MMO have also not provided any comments. The council's natural environment team, they've looked further at the kind of implications of the planning works and what that may have on the marine environment. And what they've recommended is a expanded Condition 7, essentially a construction environmental management plan. That's proposed to be secured by condition, and that would control the indirect impacts of the development on marine ecology, such as impacts caused by dust, vibration, and surface water runoff from the land into the sea. And that would manage the impacts within the intertidal zone within both jurisdictions, and also entirely in the land just within the local planning authority's jurisdiction. And it's anticipated that if the marine licence is approved, the MMO would also impose similar conditions, but to cover impacts on the marine environment, the important aspects here being seagrass, which is the habitat for protected seahorses. So I expect a bit more detail on that, but we just don't know at this stage. So this is the revised condition. The bits in bold are changes from the February committee, and we're retaining here the part about the dust and particulate airborne management plan. The additions are, just to point out, are on C. So that is to include practical measures, both physical measures and or sensitive working practices, including measures related to piling and surface water management to avoid or reduce impacts during construction. And then Part D, as I mentioned, is that airborne, that dust and airborne particles management plan. And with this expanded condition in place, officers are satisfied that the indirects on marine ecology would be sufficiently managed. So the recommendation here is to grant subject to conditions, and with that expanded condition, there wouldn't be a further requirement to wait for further advice from the Marine Management Organisation. But just to point out, we've also added an informative here as well to draw the applicant and developers' attention to the need for the marine license, which they're fully aware of, but there's no harm in putting that on the decision notice as well. So thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Matthew. That's very good. Right. Members, do you have any technical questions for the planning officer, please? No. Okay. It all seems quite clear to me as well. In that case, I invite members to take part in the debate on this particular application. Councillor O'Leary.
Yeah, I think this seems like a sensible thing to do, and it's just a sort of a routine almost of just getting this through. So yeah, I'm happy to propose.
Is there anybody who wishes to debate this particular application? Please raise your hands. If not, we'll seek a seconder. No, nobody wishes to debate any further. I seek a seconder, please, for the proposal. Councillor Christopher. You're happy to second the application of the motion?
Yes, Chair, more than happy to second the proposal by Councillor Louis O'Leary.
Thank you very much. So if everyone's clear on the proposal, all those in favour, please raise your hands. And that's 7 in favour, which is unanimous. Thank you very much. So that application is passed in accordance with the planning officer's recommendation. Thank you very much. Yeah, we will now pause while we get Councillor Matt Bell back in, please, and other members may take their seats. Thank you. All right, welcome back to the members that had removed themselves from the chamber. We now move to item 6, which is P/FUL/2024/02448, Brenda Dench House, St Mary Street, Weymouth, DT4 8PU. This will be presented by Steve Tapscott, following which we have one public speaker, which is Mr Simon Howard Dobson for the agent. Over to you, please, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. If I can get that to work. There we go. Okay, so yeah, it's quite a lengthy description of development. It will be in front of you in your committee report to read in full, but essentially what the applicant is seeking to do is add 2 further stories to this existing building to create 10 additional flats on these new upper floors. Then they're looking to install gates at both ends of an existing arcade at the ground floor, and they're looking to lose about 2/3 of an area of an existing hairdresser space in order to accommodate this new development, but then retain about 1/3 of that existing hairdresser space for retail use. Here's the site location. So it's right in the middle of Weymouth. We've got the St Mary Street down here. So I'm sure you're all familiar with Weymouth, but it's got 2 main drags. One is St Mary Street, one is St Thomas Street. So this is the St Mary Street frontage. And the site actually has dual frontage at the other side with Maiden Street. I'll give you some photos and a bit more context in a moment. So the reason it's before committee today, the recommendation before you is to refuse, but that goes against Weymouth Town Council's conclusion that the application should be approved. And Councillor Orell, who's the ward member, is also in favour of the application. The site is within Weymouth Town Centre and the defined development boundary. The St Mary Street frontage is part of the primary shopping area and the primary shopping frontage. It's in the conservation area, and there are several listed buildings nearby. So just to give you a bit of that context, the orange buildings All these ones up here and around the sides towards the bottom are Grade 2 listed. These sort of turquoise-coloured buildings are noted in the conservation area appraisal as being of local importance, so we consider them to be non-designated heritage assets. But most importantly, there's this large building here, which is St Mary's Church. So that is Grade 1 listed, and that's the highest listing you can get. So this photo just picks up on a bit more on the context. We've got the Grade 1 listed church here on the right, we've got the application site on the left, and we've got these mature trees right in the churchyard rather. And you can see that they're already abutting the building. In terms of other constraints, the site's within 5 kilometres of Chesil and the Fleet Special Area of Conservation, which means that any new overnight accommodation, such as what is proposed, needs to mitigate its recreational impacts. The site itself and the surrounding streets are identified as being at risk of various sources of flooding, both now and when climate change is taken into account. There was a previous consent back in 2021 for a fairly similar proposal to what's before you today, albeit for 9 units rather than 10. That lapsed before being implemented. And here's an axiomic, I believe it's pronounced, view of that particular proposal. You'll see when I show you the proposed plans in a minute, a number of similarities in terms of the dormers and the extra couple of stories of development in the centre of the site. So here's some photos for context. This is the main St Mary's Street frontage. You can see St Mary's Church just there on the right. And again, just showing that relationship with St Mary's Church in that second photo. This top photo is looking north up St Mary's Street. It just picks up on the varied street scene, I guess you could say. Lots of materials on display. Some of these buildings on both sides are listed. You can also see there's some variation in scale of buildings too. This bottom photograph is the rear of it, the other frontage along Maiden Street. And you can see it's looking fairly drab. We've got some unfortunate roller shutters here in the Wessex photo, part of the building here. And over on the right is the hairdresser, which has been vacant for some time. Opposite the building, again on Maiden Street, is this quite large building, fairly modern in character, almost 4 stories in height, and that's juxtaposed, sorry, I can't get my words out today, apologies, juxtaposed against the 2-story form of this development on the side. And again, you can see variations in materials and scales of buildings. And then there's, just to the south, Fish and Fritz chip shop. That's not listed, but it's one of the locally listed buildings I mentioned earlier. And one final thing to pick up from this photo, again, is that large tree just poking out from the churchyard. So just to quickly run through the plans, the top is the existing St Mary Street frontage, and the bottom is the proposed frontage. And I'll take you through some of the revisions later on, but this isn't the first set of plans we've had on this. Through the course of the application, because we had objections from the Conservation Officer, we did invite some amendments. So these are the amendments in front of you right now. So you can see the full 2 stories. They're looking to keep a kind of false pilasters here to give it a sense of arrival. And that's about all I can say about that for the moment. This is the opposite side, the Maiden Street frontage, similar to the opposite side. And then this is the southern edge. So this would be the elevation facing towards the church. Not much change here, apart from changing some of these existing roof lights for dormers, and then adding a few additional windows there. Just a quick run through the floor plans. So at the top here, we've got existing and the bottom proposed. So this is the ground floor, which is where the retail type uses are currently located. And this is the particular one I want to draw your attention to. So this is the hairdressers. So at the moment, the whole of the floor is in use by a hairdresser, albeit it's vacant at the moment. The front half onto St Mary Street is the mainstay of where all the hairdressing takes place. And to the rear is all the staff room, toilets, all that kind of thing. And so through this proposal, they'd be looking to lose about 2/3 of that space in favour of bin stores, bike stores, stairwells, lifts, all that kind of thing, but with a retention of about 36 square metres of retail floor space onto the St Mary Street frontage. So this is now going up a floor to the first floor. Not a huge amount of change with this floor. There are existing 7 flats there at the moment. The main change is this large light well here would be reduced in size just to make way for the stairwell. And then this is the existing upper floor. So at the moment, there's just the roof, but we've got 2 flats here on the southern side. So that's a total of 9 flats existing. And then the proposal is to add a full story in here. And just in terms of one of the things I'm going to be discussing later on, to leave a couple of breadcrumbs for you, I suppose, is that you can see a bedroom here and a bedroom here at the moment, and their outlook is across this area of flat roof. Whereas with the proposal, their outlook would be to within the proposed light wells here and here. And then this is the proposed upper floor and the roof as well. So they're looking to add a sedum roof. And these bits here, various plants. So they're looking to install air source heat pumps and light wells, and there'll be a lift overrun as well. So, taking you through the issues. The first is the principle of development and whether or not we consider that's acceptable. The fact that this is within Weymouth's defined development boundary and it's in the town centre. This is where we would expect development to go, subject to compliance with all other relevant policies. The loss of retail floor space is a material consideration that we need to have a think about today. It would go from quite a large retail floor space that has been unsuccessfully marketed. We've had a letter through from an estate agent, a local letting agent, who has said that they have had trouble with that for various reasons, but they have assured us that smaller retail units, as in the one that's now proposed, generally fly off the shelves, so they would welcome that sized unit to market. And we've got no evidence to the contrary, so we take that at face value. And also we haven't had any objections from our economic development officer in that respect. So therefore we're happy with the principle of development. Flood risk. So this is quite an important issue for Weymouth Town Centre. Whilst there are flats there at the moment, we've got 9 current flats, they're looking to add a further 10. So you'd be then adding to the risk to life. So that's a very important consideration. We need to consider the risk not only now, as the picture is, in terms of what the current flood risk is, but also predicted into the future with climate change. We need to understand the level of that risk, how it could be mitigated, and the safety of the future occupants of these 10 additional dwellings, as well as how would emergency services get to and from the site in an emergency situation. You may have heard of a flood risk sequential test with other planning applications. That's a test that's undertaken where a site is within an area at risk of flooding, and you have to look sequentially for other sites in the area to see if those other sites could accommodate the development in the first instance ahead of your site at risk. But in this instance, because the current local plan has said that there will be development in Weymouth, we are satisfied that that test was undertaken when the local plan was made back in 2015. So in other words, there's no need to rerun that sequential test with this application. That said, we still need to make sure that we understand the level of risk and whether or not it can be mitigated and whether or not it's safe. And the way we do that, the first thing we look at is the Weymouth Level 2 Strategic Flood Risk Assessment. And so that looks at various sources of flooding, the speed of the water, the depths of the water, and it gives it what's called a hazard rating. And it's worth bearing in mind that that piece of evidence was published in 2023. The first planning application that got approved for the redevelopment of this site was approved in 2021. So that's 2 years before this fresh evidence came out Back in 2021, the evidence wasn't there showing this level of risk, but the evidence is there now, so we need to take that into account. So looking at that document, and I'll take you through some screenshots of it in a minute, there is future flood risk of tidal flooding at high risk, which is 1 in 30 years, and medium risk in 1 in 200 year events. There's also fluvial, in other words, like river flooding, and pluvial, which is surface water flooding on a lot of the surrounding streets. The site is also identified as part of the National Flood Risk Maps published by the Environment Agency only this year. Those maps don't go to the same level of detail in terms of flood depths and velocities and things like that, but it still gives us a picture of the level of future risk that's anticipated. And finally, before I take you through those screenshots, it's just worth bearing in mind that the Association of Directors of Environment, Economy, Planning and Transport, or ADEPT as they call themselves, which is endorsed by the Environment Agency, they say that pedestrians shouldn't be subject to a hazard rating of 0.75 or above. So a hazard rating is on a scale of up to 2. So 0.75 and above is the threshold of safety for pedestrians. So with all that information in mind, I'll take you through some screenshots. So this top one just shows us the anticipated flood depths for 1 in 30 year events with climate change. And in terms of getting your bearings, I haven't marked the site, but you can see here it says PW just under my mouse there, which means place of worship. And that is the St. Mary's Church. So if you just go to the north of that into this section here, that's where the site is. So you can see that 1 in 30 year events into the future, it's anticipated that St. Mary Street will be relatively in deep water. It's not quite so bad along Maiden Street, but then if you look at St. Albans Street, Market Street, those flood depths are relatively deep. Slightly more serious flood event would be a 1 in 200 year event, and you can see predictably it's worsened. So the colours are much darker along St. Mary Street and the surrounding areas. Yes, whilst the site itself is in a relatively light blue colour and therefore not quite so deep, again, we have to bear in mind how would people get out of here in deep water and how would emergency services get in deep water. So the next level up is to then look at the velocity of the water. So you can see 1 in 30 year events, St. Mary Street, that's the fastest velocity, so that's more than 0.4 metres per second. And somewhat along Market Street and a bit on Maiden Street as well. With a 1 in 200 years, medium risk events, again, the situation's worsening there. And again, it shows how would people get out with that fast moving water. And then finally is the flood hazard rating. So I said before that the ADEPT guidance tells us anything of 0.75 and above, i.e. the green colour here. Anything darker than green is not safe for pedestrians. So if you look at the 1 in 30 year events, it's pretty much surrounded by this orange colour, so that's 1.25 to 2 rating. And same with the 1 in 200 year events. Again, the site would be an island within this hazard area. And I mentioned before the National Flood Risk Maps published only this year. Whilst they don't go into that same level of detail and depths and velocities, it still shows most of Weymouth at future risk of flooding. So the applicant has presented a solution. Originally, they didn't submit any information on flood risk. We invited them to address this issue, and they submitted us a site-specific flood risk assessment. Their solution is to take a route from the site going down Maiden Street, along here, over the bridge, and then across the harbour side, ending up at the bottom of Boot Hill. So that is a route of 600 metres. And you can see if you correspond that with the hazard rating map over here, that would be through all the orange area, through some bright red area, and then once they get to the other side of the road, again, it's the same, orange and red all the way along there. So that's a high-risk route. You also have to bear in mind that flooding, whilst tidal in this particular instance is relatively predictable, it could happen during the night when people are asleep, and there's no guarantee that anyone would sign up to an Environment Agency flood risk warning. So we consider that's not a safe escape route. The developer's plan B, if that route can't be used, is for people to stay put. And that would take 3 to 6 hours for the tide to recede. So that might be all right if you're in your peak health, but in a medical emergency, 3 to 6 hours, we don't consider as an acceptable wait. So for those reasons, we don't believe that the development would be safe for its lifetime, so the recommendation is to refuse on those grounds. So next issue is impacts on local character and heritage. Again, just showing you that map of the local heritage constraints. So we've got all these various listed buildings, locally listed buildings, and of course, St Mary's Church. So it is a very sensitive heritage setting at the heart of Weymouth's conservation area. And we must bear in mind that national policy gives great weight to conserving heritage assets, and where there is any harm identified, then we need to weigh that level of harm against the public benefits of the proposal. In terms of the local context, those photos I took you through earlier show there is a fairly varied street scene, variation in roofscapes, some materials, scale as well, albeit, there are some generalities there, around 3 stories. But there's good quality in the street scene as well, particularly with the more historic buildings. So what we have here is a comparison between the 2 sets of plans that the applicant has submitted to us. The top ones have now been superseded, but it's just to give you an idea of how the scheme has evolved and how we try to work with the applicant. So initially they were proposing these dormers with a sauna fill finish, which is a kind of single ply coating, which we considered was not appropriate for this conservation area location next to a Grade 1 listed building. We need good quality in this location. Similarly, the Eternit, which is a type of fibre cement product slate, wasn't appropriate. They should be using proper, decent slate here. The window proportions weren't reflective of the local character. And so we asked them to work with those elements and come back to us with a redesign. And so the redesign is below here. They've addressed some of those issues, which is good. So the dormers are much better proportioned now. They've got rid of the Sarnafill product in favour of lead. The windows are better. You can see now headers above the windows to give that extra bit of detail. They've now given the frontage a bit better treatment with those fake pilasters there. But unfortunately, what's happened, and this isn't anything we asked for, but you can see in the top plan, we had these fake pilasters here, which helped to separate the building and give it a vertical emphasis, whereas that's now been lost. Okay, you've got the gutters here, but doesn't quite have the same effect. And now it reads, we think, as a much larger building, particularly when all of it would be finished in this terracotta render. Again, that's not something we asked for, and we're struggling to see the reference point in Weymouth for that type of terracotta finish. So, like I say, we tried to refine the areas of dispute with the applicant. They've tried, but we're not convinced that this is good enough for this sensitive location. So the Conservation Officer has identified less than substantial harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area, which, like I just said, triggers the need to consider if there are any public benefits that would outweigh that harm. So those benefits could be 10 dwellings in a sustainable location. We need the housing numbers. It would regenerate this small pocket of Weymouth. There is a perception locally of some antisocial behaviour in the local area. Like I showed you on those photos, it's looking a bit drab. The development would involve gates to stop people using that arcade as a thoroughfare, so that could help reduce the fear of crime. But we don't consider the harm is outweighed, again, just because of how sensitive and visually prominent this site is, and we need the quality here. Okay, so the next issue to consider is the affordable and market housing mix. So the mix of units would be 4 one-beds and 6 two-bed units. It's a town centre location. Whilst we need units of all sizes across the area, given the town centre, the local character, we're happy with that mix. Because it's a major application, 10 or more homes, it means 35% affordable housing should be delivered, preferably on site. But there is a clause in our policy to say if it's not viable to do so, prove it to us and you can reduce that amount. And that's what they've done. So they submitted to us a viability assessment, which said that it's not viable to produce any affordable housing on site or even a commuted sum to pay for at least some affordable housing. We sent that to the district valuer, who's an independent body of qualified surveyors, and they've said, no, it is indeed not viable to provide any affordable housing or even a financial contribution. So we take that at face value. Okay, moving on to neighbour amenity. And I've put this aerial photo in because what it does is it highlights this window here. And this serves a flat, which is 36A in here. And it is the only window for its kitchen. At the moment, it's not got the greatest outlook, but at least it's an outlook, and at least it gets some south-facing natural light. In terms of other relationships, east and west, we're happy. It's quite a tight-grained town centre location where a degree of overlooking is part of local character. This would follow that character, so but no concerns in that respect. But yes, that kitchen window is a concern to us. In the previous plans, I'll take you through the axiometric drawings here. So this is the existing building. So the existing window will probably be around about where my mouse is up here. The previous approval left an offset there. So whilst its outlook would have been compromised, it's still an appreciable depth there. I can't quite recall how far, but in the order of probably 10, 12 metres. And importantly, the natural light would be able to enter through to that kitchen. But then this is what's before us today. And you can see that the plan is to build right up to that window, and it would completely compromise the outlook and natural light for that kitchen, which we believe is not acceptable. Moving next to the amenity of future occupiers of the 10 flats. We've measured off all of the rooms and the unit sizes against the nationally described space standards. We haven't adopted those in the local plan, but they're a good marker for what is an acceptable unit size, and we're happy in that respect. No private communal amenity space is proposed, such as balconies or anything like that, but we're happy with that because of what's available locally. So Weymouth Beach is a stone's throw away. Nove Gardens aren't too far either, so we believe that's acceptable in this particular circumstance. Environmental health are happy in terms of odour and noise from nearby businesses, lots of pubs and clubs and chip shops and all sorts of activity going on, but yes, that's fine. We do, however, have concerns in terms of the relationship with the trees to the south. So several bedrooms are proposed in that location. So again, just showing you a photo here, those third-party trees in someone else's ownership already abut the building, and you can see just how close they would be to the new windows proposed along here and to the dormers proposed just above. So a couple of things just to take you through on this floor plan. So this is the existing and proposed second floor plan at the moment. So existing, we've got this area of flat roof. Remember I said to you earlier about these two bedrooms here and here that currently have a window that look over this area of flat roof. Not the best view, but at least it is an outlook of sorts with natural light. But what would happen under the plans is to put the light wells above, and their view would be around about 3 meters, 3.4 meters, I believe, to a blank wall the other side. So they wouldn't actually have a view, and the light would probably be quite limited as well. For this bedroom here, that's even worse, I believe. It's the same sort of distance, 3.4 meters, but it's much more enclosed and much more tunnelled. On the opposite side, looking south, these bedrooms, they would have one window each as well. They would be right looking at those trees. Looking up to the top floor, again, the same problem with trees and that view from these new dormers, one window to serve each of these bedrooms. And then finally, this is flat 18, bedroom 1. It's a twin bedroom. It would have the light well coming through, and that distance from the window to the wall is 1.2 metres, which we don't think is an acceptable outlook. Okay, moving on to highways. They're happy in terms of this being a car-free scheme. There's cycle storage proposed, and subject to securing that by a planning condition, highways offer no objections. Ecological issues. The Natural and Environment team were consulted on the application, which was supported by an ecological report. So NET are happy, subject to securing ecological mitigation and enhancement measures. In terms of biodiversity net gain, this is exempt because it's building upwards and not outwards over any habitat. So we would call that de minimis in planning terms. The Chesilton Fleet SAC, the Special Area of Conservation, the recreational impacts are mitigated through the Community Infrastructure Levy, and as this would be liable to pay into that pot, then mitigation would be forthcoming. So no objections in that respect. The waste team were consulted, but they didn't send any response in, so in the absence of any objections, we're satisfied it's acceptable. And then the final issue is trees. So again, for a third time, I'll show you that picture of that tree there. These trees are noted in the adopted conservation area appraisal for Weymouth as being very important to local character. And they are good specimens, but evidently compromised by the existing building. So they are a physical constraint to doing this development. And importantly, they're in third-party ownership, not in the control of the developer. So the tree officer has been consulted on it, and they've told us that the applicant would need to obtain a separate consent outside of what you're considering today, just to cut back the trees to access the site to undertake the development. So to get the scaffolding up, that sort of thing. There's no guarantee of that happening. The trees would then need to be protected during construction, so things like Harris fencing or whatever the method would be. Again, you're dealing with third-party ownership, so there's no guarantee of that happening. One step ahead of that, if the building were to go ahead and people to occupy the flats, there would need to be an ongoing agreement with the landowner of these trees to ensure regular maintenance, to chop them back and ensure that there's a view and sufficient light. But I'm told you need to chop them back quite a long way to do that, which then has its own issues in terms of these highly valuable trees in the public domain. Sorry, not in the public domain, in public views, pardon me. So in all, there's no certainty over the welfare and maintenance of these trees in third-party ownership, and therefore we can't support the application on that basis, and that's another reason for refusal. So overall, for the reasons discussed, our recommendation is to refuse. The national planning law says that planning applications need to be determined in accordance with local plan policies, unless there are material considerations that say otherwise. And that means you can do a planning balance taking into account those material considerations. So at the moment, we've got a housing land supply that is 5.02 years. We're supposed to demonstrate 5 years. So we've got a tiny margin, but it's looking like next month when the calculation is redone, that will fall away. So we can give positive weight to the 10 dwellings that would arise from this development. And so that is a benefit, 10 homes in a sustainable town centre location. There'll be economic benefits as well when the dwellings are constructed, and then ongoing as the 10 new households would be able to support local services. There's the perceived reduction in antisocial behaviour I mentioned before, about uplifting this, regenerating this small area of Weymouth. However, contrary to all that is that the MPPF requires developments in areas at risk of flooding to be either avoided or made safe. And in this case, we do not believe that it would be made safe. The design is unacceptable for the reasons set out, and because it's in the setting of several listed, one incredibly important listed building, and the NPPF attaches great weight to conserving heritage. There's the poor relationship with the kitchen at number 36A, and there's the poor living conditions for flats. So 5 of the flats we don't believe would have acceptable living conditions. And then finally, there's the unacceptable relationship with those important third-party trees. So for those reasons, we don't believe that any material considerations outweigh the conflict with the development plan policies. And so the recommendation is to refuse for the 5 reasons before you. And that's my presentation concluded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. A good presentation on quite a complex application, I think, this one. I'm sure there's going to be some debate. Before we move to that, we have one public speaker, Mr. Simon Howard-Dobson, who's the agent. Simon, you have 3 minutes from when you start speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This application addresses and improves the access to the existing and new flats, incorporates flood resilience, and ensures bin and bike store standards are met. It adds insulation and improves heating and ventilation to the existing flats, raising living standards. In their report, officers have taken the new flood risk data into account, but have not given sufficient weight to the flood warning and evacuation plan prepared by Ridge and Partners. Their plan takes the Environment Agency's data and uses it to consider the effect on existing and future residents. I emphasise that they assess the current risk level of all types of flooding as low. The main risk is from tidal flooding. There is little risk from surface water, even over the 100-year design life of the building. Tidal events take place at known times and places, and warnings are given by the EA from 3 to 12 hours ahead of an event. Tidal flood events recede over a 3 to 6 hour period. Tidal risk increases over the next 100 years to 2125, such that the whole town centre would be flooded if flood defences are not introduced by state or local government. It is inconceivable that the whole of Weymouth would remain unprotected in the future. The plan demonstrates a safe escape route, only affected to a depth of 30 to 60 centimetres at peak events, and emphasises that residents have a safe place to stay during a flood event, as the dwellings are all at first floor and above. The ground floor will be protected by flood barriers and flood resilient services. This is a point accepted by the EA in their advice, but not given weight by officers. In evaluating risk, note that the building houses 25 residents and the proposal adds a similar number. 25 additional residents in a town centre with hundreds, perhaps thousands, who face the same risks, but without the planned flood resilience we provide. Our proposal allows this building to contribute to and enhance the conservation area. If the limited flood risk present now, and only slowly increasing, is to sterilise the town centre, then no development is likely to take place in Weymouth to the detriment of the community and the conservation area. All design and material concerns raised by conservation have been met, but the final version submitted was deemed too late to be considered. This can be dealt with through a materials condition. Concerns regarding daylighting and outlook can be addressed by a daylight assessment condition. Concerns regarding adjoining trees can be addressed by an arboriculture condition. Protection of such trees and access to construction is normal and requires a negotiation between landowners. It is not normally a reason for refusal of planning permission unless removal of protected trees is proposed and not justified. Note that the trees were not a concern 3 years ago when the previous consent was granted. I hope that my points are well received and that the committee will grant consent, allowing the site to be developed as proposed, creating needed housing and much improvement to the quality of life of the existing residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I did let you go on a bit, but I wanted to hear the end. So I'll move back to Steve. Obviously, there's a few things there that you may wish to address. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, there's quite a lot to go through there. I'll just pick out the sort of main salient points as I heard them. In terms of the flood evacuation plan that was just mentioned and the site-specific flood risk assessment, I believe the gentleman just said that it looks at current risk and the fact that the evacuation route is okay. But that's not what a site-specific flood risk assessment should be looking at. It needs to look at current and future risk. And so the maps I took the committee through a moment ago show the level of risk predicted for the future, which is the issue here. He mentioned about future residents signing up to the Environment Agency flood warning system. They would be free to do that, but we can't force anyone to do it, and there's no guarantee everybody would do it either. So that can't be relied on. And we have seen inspectors' reports, not specifically related to Weymouth, but at a national level, that do cover that off as a legitimate reason to refuse planning permission, because you cannot force anyone to sign up to these evacuation plans. I take the point that the whole town centre is at risk, and that is an issue moving forward. We would like to see lots of Weymouth regenerated. We should be looking to build in Weymouth, but we have to go with what's before us in terms of evidence at the moment. And also, please bear in mind that the current local plan was adopted in 2015 before the current evidence came out in 2023. So that's something for the strategic planning team to be addressing with the new local plan and taking into account, can flood defences be deliverable in the town centre to allow for more development to happen. That's not really the job of this application to sort out. This application needs to look at the current situation based on evidence. With regard to the 30 to 60 centimetre depth of the escape route, again, just looking at the hazard data, then that's what we need to be taking into account, because that doesn't just account for the depth of the water, but the flow of the water as well. And so 30 to 60 centimetres can knock you off your feet. Yes, the existing residents are at risk. There are thousands of existing residents in Weymouth Town Centre who are probably at risk, but that doesn't mean we need to add the risk for more people. The comment about additional plans amending the design not being accepted, I don't recall any additional plans being submitted. That may be my memory failing me, or most likely the case was that we told the applicant, as we ordinarily do, we're happy to accept one set of plans and consult on them, because if we keep doing that iterative process every time we get an amendment in, we would never get anything determined. So we generally say one set of plans, that's your 1 second chance. The point about the trees not being a concern in the 2021 application, I'm afraid I've looked through the file. That he is indeed correct. It wasn't a concern. The tree officer wasn't even consulted back then. I can't explain why. It could be post-COVID and something to do with site visits. I don't know. But what I would say is that is evidently a mistake from 4 years ago, but we shouldn't have to repeat that same mistake with this application and prejudice those third-party trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. That's the clarity is much appreciated. I've had quite a few questions myself along the same lines. Members, obviously this one's quite complex. By all means, take your time. If you have more than one question, I'll take you in turn. But please bear in mind the clarifications you just had from the planning officer. This is not the place to debate the future of Weymouth regeneration. I think Councillor O'Leary, you had your hand up first some time ago, followed by Councillor Kimber. Councillor Northam, I'll take it in that order, please. Thank you.
Yes. Someone's mic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman. Just two questions, and then I do have quite a lot to say on the debate when it comes to that. Is the intention to retain the name Brenda Dench House? I think that's important that we retain that name in memory of that lady. And secondly, it's my understanding that a number of the residents were evacuated or rehoused from this site in about 2020, 2021, because I did have some involvement with some of the residents there. Can that be confirmed if that was the case?
I will ask the planning officer, but I'm not sure on that one, Councillor O'Leary. Over to you, Steve, please.
Well, the first question, we can't really we can't control the names of buildings or anything like that. So I'm afraid that would have to be a request of the landowner, which you'd need to do separately. It's not something the planning system can control. In terms of the residents being evacuated, and no, I wasn't aware of that. I can't verify one way or another, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you for that. I do believe, a quick nod to the agent, that it will be retained, I believe. It's the intention, but we obviously can't condition that. Are you happy with the responses, Councillor O'Leary?
I just want to say, when I was reading it this week in preparation for this, but it's my understanding in 2020, 2021 that the residents were rehoused because of the dilapidation and sheer state of this property. So it just shows you the backstory towards this. Like I say, I would like to speak on the debate about it in further.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll hold that one. Who was second? Councillor Kimber, I believe, yes. And then Councillor Northam.
Thank you, Chair, fellow councillors. I wanted to ask a few areas. Was the fire service consulted as amongst the consultees? That's one question. For once I agree with Louis O'Leary. Brenda Dench was quite a hero of mine, working with her for many years. The other one I wanted to turn to is we're talking about gates at the during the passageway. That hasn't we haven't had any sort of direction on that. I wondered if you could give us that. Why I say that, because I remember the original application, and that arcade or the passageway through did cause some public concern at the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kimber. Steve, could you respond to those, please?
Yes, Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue were consulted as part of the application on it. I specifically asked them to respond on that point about the gates, because the concern raised, I think it was Councillor Orrell as the ward member, he queried it as well. What if people are trapped in the event of a fire and they can't get through the gates? The answer from the fire and rescue team was that it's actually a matter for the building regulation stage. So in principle, from a planning perspective, that's okay. But if at the building regulation stage, they can't agree on how the gates would function in the event of a fire, and that could be through some form of override system, a common PIN code or something like that. If that isn't surmountable at building regulation stage, and they wouldn't be able to install the gates. But as far as we're concerned from a planning perspective, there's no reason to say why they can't have gates.
Thank you, Steve. Are you happy, Councillor Kimber, with the responses?
At this stage, I have to be.
Thank you very much. Councillor Northam, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm concerned about the flood risk. As has been said, it is a flood risk existing in Weymouth. Parts of Weymouth have flooded. In recent times, boats have been used to provide access and egress to the residents in the streets. It's a known hazard, and obviously Dorset Council is working at some length to address the flood risk for the future. And whilst the plans are partly in place, we voted on the harbour walls, which contributes to the overall strategy. There's a lot that still needs to be funded by government or by council or a combination. But it's definitely Dorset Council's intent at the moment to put forward such a case, and I do think that has some bearing. That's a comment, so I need to ask a question. The question I'd like to ask is the velocity calculations. I've looked at the SFRA 2 and the latest editions, and it's a huge document. It's really difficult to understand, and I may well have missed bits in there, but I don't recollect velocity calculations, and I'm concerned that at where these numbers have come from, because they seem to carry the weight as the officer has stated the 30 to 60 centimetres itself isn't a risk, it's the flow of water at that depth that's a risk. But I'm not sure where those velocity rates come from. So I'd like to understand a little bit more about those velocity calculations that have been done and whether that fact that there's concern from the officer in that area has been communicated to the applicant.
Thank you, Councillor Northam. Is that your only question, or do you have further ones you wish to come back with? Okay. Steve, over to you, please.
Did you want me to respond in respect of Dorset Council's intention to?
You don't need to, but if you wish to, I'm more than happy for you to.
Well, I guess I'd have to keep it short and sweet, really, because we need to consider what's before us now, not something that might happen in the future, which is, you know, a movable feast in terms of funding and what's actually possible and getting any agreement actually in place. So I don't think we can give any weight at all to a future intention to look at solving the problem. Not saying that there might not be a solution, but we need to have an actual solution, and it needs to be deliverable for us to give it some weight for this application. In terms of the velocity rates, it's not my area of expertise. I'm not a qualified flood risk engineer, but that's why we farm these sorts of technical things out to people who are experts in their field. I also tried to look up velocity rates and how they're calculated, and I couldn't find it either. So there must be a formula, although it's not set out explicitly in the document. And to my mind, I'm speculating, but it must take account of things like gradients in the land, the state of the tide and the speed of the water moving at that particular time. It could take into account funneling effects of existing buildings and how that might exacerbate the flows. I don't have the exact formula in front of me, but I think we need to trust that the independent consultants who did this piece of work knew what they were doing, and we take that at face value.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I think that is a good point. We do have to accept the opinion or the responses of consultees. We can't sit and challenge that every time somebody puts forward a professional opinion. Councillor Northam?
Thank you, Chair. My question really was, where have these numbers come from? It doesn't refer to I didn't notice it referring to an independent consultant. Was that an independent consultant that we commissioned? Certainly when the environmental agency responded, they didn't say that there needed to be an independent assessment. They did point out that it's the local authority's duty to determine the safe access and such like. But I couldn't find that report when I looked up. That's not to say it's not there, but there's heaps of documents there. So I'd like to see where that is, because I actually was a hydrodynamicist, and I'd like to be able to look at the data, because it's not a perfect science. Thank you.
I think the question as to who actually came forward with this advice would be appreciated. Steve, if you can answer that.
Yeah, so what I'm referring to is the Strategic Flood Risk Assessment 2 for Weymouth, and that was produced by a firm called JBA Consultancy, which is a national body of professional drainage engineers, and that was produced in 2023. So what they did is they came up with that, and then we have to have due regard to it as a piece of independent evidence that tells us about predicted levels of flood risk and so forth in Weymouth. So they weren't consulted on this application. The two bodies who work, they weren't. No, we don't consult them. They produce the evidence, but that doesn't mean we then need to consult with them for every planning application, because we need to consult with the Environment Agency and the lead local flood authority, which is part of Dorset Council. So the Environment Agency, they said that they wouldn't comment in respect of the technical nature of it, but they said that looking at access and egress from the site, which is something I've explained today, is something for us to consider. The lead local flood authority are more concerned with drainage and how hard surfaces and things like that, and the roofs and things would impact upon the local drainage infrastructure.
Thank you for that, Steve. I think that's a bit clearer now. Yes, Councillor Northam, last one. Thank you.
Last part of the question was, whilst I wanted to get hold of the SFRA too, and although it was published within Dorset Council back in 2023, it wasn't made public until 2024 after some pressure. So I asked whether this concern about the velocities has been communicated with to the applicant.
Yeah, thank you. Steve, can you just finally clear this one up, please?
Yeah, apologies for not being completely clear. I've just learned that, yes, the date of the SFRA2 is 2023, but it wasn't published into the public domain because there was a couple of questions about it until 2024, which predates this application, which means it was there to publicly view by the developer before they put in their planning application. So they should have been aware of it. It's not our job to say to a developer about pinpoint them to absolutely everything. We publish it all online, and it's their job to have regard to it as they put their planning application together. And they also didn't do any pre-application advice on this specific application. Had they done that, we would have been able to pinpoint it to them.
Thank you very much for that, Steve. Councillor Northam, do you wish to come back, or are you happy now? Okay, thank you. We do have two other technical question requests. I think Councillor Shortell, followed by Councillor Roper, please.
Thank you, Chairman. David Shortell, West Morsland Three-Legged Cross. In view of the emphasis that's been placed on the possibility of flood affecting that particular area, has the officer paid attention to the structure of the building and how the flood waters would affect the strength of the building and holding up the additional 2 floors that's going to be built at the top? In other words, is the building strong enough, bearing in mind that there is a possibility of floodplain, to actually accommodate the extension?
I would certainly hope so, but I'll pass it over to Steve Tapscott, please.
I'm afraid the answer is no. No, it's not something that we in planning consider. We're not the structural engineers. We don't do the building regs side of things. So when it comes to doing the actual build and making sure that the existing walls and everything else can hold the additional load, that is for the building regulations stage, which is completely separate to what we're here for today.
Councillor Shortell, if you wish to come back. Thanks, Steve.
Has that, and back to the officer, if I may, has that inquiry been made of the structural engineers and the possibility of any problems occurring thereafter?
Steve, please.
No, again, no, that's not something we look at the planning application stage.
Thank you, Steve, for that. Are you happy now, Councillor Shortell? Well, content with the answer. It's not really our position to have to do that, I think, is the answer.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a little bit surprised in view of the fact, of course, we're actually considering the extension to this particular building without taking into account whether the building is strong enough to accommodate it.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the role of the planning committee, but just to double check, I'll go back to Steve, please.
No, I'm sorry. Again, I appreciate where you're coming from. And in terms of logistics and carrying out the build, it's something that is going to be very important. But from a planning perspective, it's not a matter for planning law.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll assume that's cleared that up, Councillor Shortell. Councillor Pete Roper, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Pete Roper, Portland Ward. I suppose it's similar to Councillor Shortell's sort of worry about the safety of the building itself. And myself, I'd be worried about the, obviously the structure of the building. I'm worried about that in a flood, but also the security of the residents as well. We've been talking about the gates shouldn't sort of be of any issue. But it's possible, if in a flood with flow rates, etc., and the layout of the streets of Weymouth, that we will get some quite sort of strong flow rates. And I'm just wondering if the gates could sort of compromise the safety of the residents should they fail in a flood, and residents might not be able to actually get out of the building.
Thank you. Steve, please.
Again, that's a fair comment, and that does link to the reason why I went back to Dorset and Wilts Fire and Rescue, because admittedly I asked that question in terms of what if there's a fire and people can't get out, but you're quite right. What if there's a flood and people can't get out? I'm supposing that the answer would be the same. It's a matter for building regulations and whether or not there is a solution to some sort of PIN code, an override, or whatever it is. But that's not something that we can consider for planning purposes. I guess for us, it's whether or not the gates are acceptable from a visual amenity perspective. Is it right for the building, that sort of thing? Not so much is it safe, because that's for the building regulation stage.
Thank you for that, Steve. Councillor Rope, are you happy with the response? You are, okay. Councillor Northern, please.
Thank you. Picking up on the affordable homes criteria and the viability, when the application is made, does the application have to state whether the homes are for rent or for purchase? In which case, is it either of those? Which is it?
Steve, please. I have no idea. So.
No, they don't have to say how they're going to be used, but they are market homes. That's what's written on the planning application form. So that could then become, in a variety of uses, a second home. It could be a rental accommodation. It could be someone's principal residence. That's up for the market to decide.
Councillor Northern?
No, in the debate I'll follow up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Belinda Borden, I believe. I don't think there's anybody else. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Belinda Borden, I'm Regis in Charmouth. Could you just clarify, you mentioned at one point there's no community space included, and there was something, I thought you said something about there was no, in the viability comments, no community contribution, but then you did mention something about community infrastructure levy. Could you just clarify I've misunderstood one part of that, I think. Thanks.
Yeah, so what I was talking about about the open space was on site. We would generally expect, sometimes in town centres, to have balconies. Perhaps there's a little bit of space for people to sit out and enjoy, or even a rooftop terrace, perhaps something like that, or some other bit of communal space for people to use. Depending on the circumstances of the actual site, that might be plausible, or not. And in this particular instance, there's no room for it, but it's right next to Weymouth Beach, it's right next to the Nothe Gardens. We think there's enough there for people to get out and about. So that's not a particular issue. The community infrastructure levy is something completely different. So that is a pot of money that new development pays into, and then that goes towards mitigating various infrastructure around Weymouth and beyond. And in this particular instance, I mentioned it because the site is within 5 kilometres of the Fleet, Chesil and the Fleet, where there's a particular pressure arising from more people, recreational pressure, so that needs to be mitigated. And the way you mitigate it is taking out of that community infrastructure levy pot. So hopefully that, hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Borden, are you happy with the response?
Yes, I think so. I also just wanted to ask about, what was it? Whether any of the concerns about the heritage and the quality of the materials and the safety concerns, whether any of them could be dealt with by conditions or not.
Okay, Steve, please.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we gave thought to that. You can't really condition the design of a building. So I have been through with the conservation officer what they think would become acceptable, and there's quite a few amendments that would be needed. We do believe that there is an acceptable scheme out there, and it wouldn't be appropriate to condition those details. We would want revised plans. But the problem with this application is we've already invited one set of revised plans. What they came back with, it went off at a tangent that we weren't even expecting. And there must reach a point where we have to determine applications. I think that had we not had these other very significant concerns, then we may have been able to pause and just say, all right, one last go, come on, we want this, please submit it to us, and we could have overcome it all. But the sort of weight against everything else of this scheme just made us think, well, it's not even worth doing that, so let's just draw a line with what we've got. Yeah, and when you mentioned about safety concerns, did you mean in terms of the flood risk? And whether or not that could be done by conditions?
That's obviously quite a sort of major one, but it was more the things about the gates and the, but which you've already explained were to do with building controls. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Matt Bell, please.
Matt Bell, Radipole Ward. Councillor Borden beat me to it. I was going to ask a very, very similar question to do with colours of the building and other aspects that were mentioned, but I think it's just been squared away by the officer in the last description. So thank you.
That's lovely, thank you. Anybody else with any questions for the planning officer? If not, I've just got one. Steve, can you just clarify this evacuation? I mean, obviously, it seems like there's two alternatives that are put forward. One is to stay put and hope that nothing happens to anybody within 5 or 6 hours, and the other is to go across some tortuous route that gets even deeper flooding the further you go away from the building itself. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, yes. And our concern with that, the escape route, not only the fact that it is quite deep and fast-flowing water, is the length of it. It's about 600 metres. And that could be, I mean, if you imagine a worst-case scenario, in the middle of the night, a less abled individual without anyone to help them, then that could be quite a task in itself.
Okay, so we're hoping to mitigate it with some kind of an escape plan, I think, is obviously what's being put forward. Can you just clarify for me? I believe, although this shouldn't necessarily affect this decision today, but there have been other applications turned down on this very same subject of flooding. And was there not an inspector involved as well recently on one? I may be misunderstanding, but I think there was.
On the first point, yes, that is correct. There have been some refusals, one of which was by committee within the last 6 months or so, I believe, in January. This actual committee, yeah, and that was for the Quick Fit site on Commercial Road. So that was refused on very similar grounds to this. We haven't had any planning inspectorate appeal decisions on this, I'm afraid. That would be useful if we did.
Okay, thank you for that. There's been so many, my mind gets a bit confused on what's happened in the future. Okay, if there are no more technical questions, Councillor Leary, was your hand up or just changing your stance? Okay, in that case, we'll move to debate, please. And Councillor Louis O'Leary first.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I've been absolutely dying to get in on this one. I always think you should call a spade what's a spade, and quite frankly, this building, as it stands, is an eyesore and a bit of a dump. It's not a fitting tribute to an ex-mayor who lost her life in office in its current state. The talk about flooding and flood risk in this site, to me, is as if we're talking about a site that's sort of been built on a beach. If Brenda Dench House is going to start flooding anytime soon, then every time I go to town, which I do on a regular basis, I'm going to be wearing armbands and a rubber ring. We've just approved Maiden Street Methodist Church for redevelopment, which is right round the corner. There are other sites all over town that are going to be coming forward. If we're going to halt redevelopment on this site and potentially then for other sites that are going to be of a similar nature, then this town isn't going to move forward. I don't believe that the reasons given are grounds enough for the benefits it's going to give. The underpass, for instance, if you frequent Weymouth pubs of an evening on a regular basis, as I do and enjoy doing, then every time you walk past this underpass, what you'll normally see is some fella taking a leak or some people down there up to no good. To have these gates on there would be a great improvement. There are other alternative footways. If you're flooding in Brenda Dench House in the next 10 to 20 years, it's very, very unlikely to where it is. But if that's happening, then we shouldn't be encouraging anybody to ever come to Weymouth because you could potentially drown or get washed away with floods. This is a highly dense, built-up urban area as it is. To stop the redevelopment of this awful-looking building, which frankly, in my opinion, the best thing we could do is knock it down and rebuild it as something else on the site, but that's not what we're here to discuss. In regards to overlooking, I'm afraid in an urban area, as I just described, it is just a fact of life. This isn't a rural area or a housing estate. This is a built-up urban town centre conurbation, and overlooking is just a part of life. I grew up, spent part of my time living in a flat in town centre, and it was just a common occurrence due to the nature of the area. So therefore, it's my opinion that the potential economic development and redevelopment, the housing needs and the potential community safety benefits outweigh potential flood risk, outweigh the effect it will have on the town centre, heritage and conservation, which quite frankly, if you saw what was there before 80 years ago, you wouldn't be building that. This would never have been built in the first place because it's completely out of step with most of the rest of the town centre. So therefore, I'm happy to make a proposal, but I would like to go against the officer recommendation and put forward that we accept this application based on the grounds I've just stated.
Thank you for your proposal, Councillor O'Leary. Obviously, there's other members who wish to join the debate, and I'll just hold that for the time being, but thank you for putting it on the table. Just bear with, sorry, Anne Collins wishes to just come in on that one.
Sorry, can I just come back on a technical point? Councillor O'Leary referred to the Maiden Street Methodist Church, which is currently being redeveloped for flats. However, that consent was from 2019, so predates all the recent evidence we've had from 2024 onwards about the increased future flood risk to Weymouth Town Centre. I just want to emphasise that, members did refuse the Westway scheme in January 2025 this year, this committee members, on the same issue about access and egress in the event of a flood, and we as officers have determined a number of applications and refused them for the very same reason.
Thank you for that, Anne. That's a very pertinent point. Who was next? Councillor Northam, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. Somewhat in support of what Councillor O'Leary has suggested, the previous government was encouraging densification, which in Weymouth doesn't mean building out, because you can't, it means building up. And this is a good example of increasing density. As was pointed out in the officer's presentation, there's already a 4-storey block of apartments opposite, which is predominantly red in colour. So I find it difficult to understand how we can try and apply conservation laws retrospectively to what is already an eyesore in the context of surrounding buildings which don't offer much improvement or anything that really relates to the current, to the old style of Weymouth Town Centre. And this is in the old part. So I find the conservation argument somewhat tenuous. What's there at the moment, this is an improvement on that and will be more in keeping with the surrounds. It may not be an old building, but that's not where we're starting from. It's an existing building. So densification, conservation, I think are concerns, and I agree with Councillor O'Leary that there are benefits here. This will improve the conservation, the appearance of the town, this plan. It will improve the situation for the existing residents as well as providing more residents. That needs to be emphasised, and the applicant did mention that himself. Although these aren't affordable homes, the size of the properties, the constraints within the properties are going to affect the market price. And I would imagine, and I can only imagine, that these won't be selling at the top end of seafront views because there are no seafront views. These are much needed accommodation in Weymouth. In Weymouth, as according to the census, we have some of the lowest car ownership. We have a high number of people living in flats. When I was supporting food banks, most of the people attending the food banks, they were in flat something or other in block so-and-so. They are in that sort of accommodation, and it's much needed in Weymouth. And improving the conditions of that accommodation is a huge benefit. So I would also like to support the argument that the benefits outweigh the harm. And the conservation was less than substantial harm, and I believe, again, the benefits of the improvement compared with what it is outweigh the conservation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Northam. Oh.
So if you're calling for seconders, I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you. Just bear with me, Councillor Northam. Thank you. Councillor Christopher, please.
This will take a while. Planning, as I understand it, is quasi-judicial. And one of our near neighbours, Lord Norberg of Abbotsbury, once said that there are two sorts of judges, the pre-Raphaelites and Impressionists, those who read every word and those judges who, before the case, actually just get a general impression. And I do wonder sometimes whether people have actually read the report, because the conservation officer is not impressed with this and says it is harmful. It is harmful to the conservation area and it is harmful to the heritage assets. Now, I put it to you by way of humour, Councillor Louis O'Leary, would you like me to rewire your house? And the answer is probably no, because I am not an electrician in the same way neither you nor I are flood experts. And we have heard here that we've got a report from flooding experts to say that there is a concern. So I don't see how you can have a situation whereby you have a building that is less than perfect clearly, but you have a design which fails the test to convince the case officer, who is not convinced by the scale, the mass, or the design of what is put in front of him, and indeed the fact that it's harmful to the conservation area and also to the listed building. And I haven't even got round to the question of trees, but I'm sure Councillor Belinda Borden will talk about that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Christopher. Councillor Borden, do you wish to respond to this? If not, I should ask for Councillor O'Leary.
Yes, I wasn't particularly going to mention the trees, but I do think that there is enough of the concerns in the officer's report and recommendation, and we've heard that the sort of iterative process can't go on indefinitely to improve the design enough to overcome the serious sort of background problems, if you like, that can't be ignored of the flood risk. And I suppose, yes, Councillor Christopher, the tree as well. So yes, I share Councillor Christopher's concerns that there is enough in there that could be improved by a better application. So I don't support the proposal to override the planning officer's decision.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Borden. I've got Councillor Louis O'Leary, and then Councillor Christopher, and then Councillor Kimber.
Yeah, thank you very much. I respect the member for Marshall Vale, but I must say most of what he just said is absolute Tommy rot. We are, he can talk about judges and judiciaries. We are elected members who are elected from geographical areas to come here, listen to advice and expert advice and opinions from officers and planning officers and third parties. However, I think what you are likely to find in here is probably a difference of opinion from Weymouth members to non-Weymouth members, because Weymouth members know this area like the back of their hand and other members may not. That's the whole purpose of a planning committee. We are all here to judge a planning application on its merits, but we are here to give an opinion. It is my opinion as somebody that knows this building very well that it is far from being a conservation asset as it currently is, and that the new scheme would be far better than what is currently there. That is my opinion based on the evidence provided in this application and on personal experience and actually knowing the site. In regards to flooding, it's the same thing. I know exactly where this site is. I know from personal experience and from previous incidents on that site that there has been no recent flooding activity in that area that would be of a dangerous nature to this property in particular. If it was that bad, surely we wouldn't be having anybody living in that area as it is, let alone instead of doing anything new. If we're going to start halting all developments because of a couple of trees and potential flooding, then we might as well just say Weymouth's closed, it's just become a museum and perhaps a water park in about 5 years based on a lot of the, frankly, scaremongering report. And I don't blame these officers for that at all. They're going on what they're being told from other experts. But I think there's an awful lot of doom and gloom about what are reports that say potential and possible as opposed to definites.
Thank you for that, Councillor O'Leary. We do have Councillor Christopher, followed by Councillor Kimber, then Councillor Northam, and then Councillor Isenk would like to speak as well. So that's fourth, and I might like to speak as well. It could be number 5.
Councillor Simon Christopher, representing the Marshwood Vale, born in Weymouth. Thank you. What I would like to say is that this particular application could obviously be better if it was a better design, not compromise the conservation area in the way that it does, and the listed building. It doesn't provide any affordable housing. There has been a great deal of discussion about flooding, and it does occur to me, why do you actually consult a flooding expert and then actually go against the opinion is an interesting one in an urban area. And I would like to ask members outside of the meeting, why was it necessary when there was a recent fire at Brewery Square for the high-level fire engine to come from Salisbury rather than Weymouth? But that is for another day. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Christopher. I think it's Councillor Kimber next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Fellow councillors, Councillor Paul Kimber, Portland. I take a bit of an exception that from Councillor Louis O'Leary that only people from councillors from Weymouth can decide this. I've been decided planning applications in Weymouth for many a year. I actually agree with Councillor Christopher. This is something, if we don't take safety in concern, then we're going down a very slippery road and a very concerning way. Global warming is a fact, and we know that the sea is rising. And if you're a Portland member, you've always got that one eye from the floods that we've had to endure in the past, and and the cost and what it does to a community. So I do take very, very seriously about floods and flooding. I do suggest that we do, or somewhere along the line outside the meeting, that we do look at how we deal with this in Weymouth, because this is something that we're going to have to look at what we don't want to happen in Weymouth. We don't want to let the place Weymouth deteriorate because of we can't deal with this. I think maybe it's having the right plans with the right information. And lastly, I'm very, very concerned. I go back some years when I've dealt with this planning application before about putting gates on that arcade and through that right of way. I would very much, I couldn't accept that either. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kimber. I think for clarity, I do not believe Councillor Louis O'Leary said that only members from Weymouth could decide this one. I think you've inferred that, but that wasn't his words at all. So I'd just like to correct that, if I may. Councillor Northam, followed by Councillor Iseng, please.
Thank you. I'm wondering what happens either way that we vote as a committee. And I'm wondering whether a deferral might have some benefit. There's two things that I consider might contribute. One is that the applicant has mentioned an alternative scheme for the outside of the building. That's not recognised by the officer. That's not to say it isn't there. I think that might need to be followed through, because otherwise that becomes perhaps a reason for the applicant to protest. I've started to look at the SFRA, and it's as dense and unfathomable as I remember. It talks about velocity. It talks about unknowns. It says that it hasn't looked at all the watercourses. It says various things. And to say that we've consulted as the officer said, we have not consulted anybody about this particular application. What the officer has done is reference the general report for the whole area and has interpreted what information is in there. And I do feel that the applicant should have an opportunity, other than responding to a refusal, to address the points that have been made around velocity, because there's also an awareness scheme that's been running in the town centre with flood warnings and such like. And as has been said, this is not rain, this is tidal over surge, flooding parts of the town centre. And it is a degree of predictability, and sitting tight is probably the best option, particularly if you're now 4 stories up. It's never going to be that high. We're talking 30 to 60 centimetres. And there's no habitation, there's no living in the ground floor for this particular site. So I think that the access and egress is a little bit spurious, because you don't have to leave, and that's an allowed course of action. You wait. So I may have got myself in a bit of a mess now, because I can't see either way without a deferral and more information on that particular topic from the applicant and the other conservation matters, which I think are so subjective anyway. And I agree that an improvement to the building is an improvement to the conservation in the area. And I do disagree with the conservation officer on that. Thank you.
Councillor Northern, for clarity, you did actually second the proposal from Councillor O'Leary. Are you still seconding that proposal, or are you withdrawing it and requesting something different later on?
Sorry. I think, for clarity, I now need to take that course, because I'm not sure it's the best course of action. The seconding of Councillor O'Leary's motion with view to suggesting a deferral downstream, if that opportunity arises.
I like this committee. It does test the chairman. Councillor Iseng would like to speak, please.
Thank you, Councillor Neil Egerton Ward. Yes, gosh, there's a lot going on here, isn't there? I suppose I wanted to just chip into the debate in terms of really appreciating where Weymouth councillors, particularly Councillor O'Leary, is coming from. You know, it's not my local area. Therefore, I can't testify to the condition of the exact area, but I do hear Weymouth councillors say it's pretty dire. Any improvement as soon as possible is going to be good. I suppose my concerns more lie around, we've spent a lot of time talking about the flood risk. Clearly, that's an enormous issue, but there are multiple other issues highlighted within the application as well. Certain things around the trees, for instance, whilst I heard the applicant say, aspects of the tree work could potentially be conditioned, I'm not sure how you condition things related to third-party assets. That would be for the applicant to discuss with their next-door neighbours. But there are other reasons, that the exit route, for instance, through deep floodwater. There is the amenity impact, in relation to several windows having very, very poor outlooks. And at the end of the day, we can only approve the application that's in front of us today. And from my perspective, I feel like there's quite a lot of gaps in what I'm looking at today, not just the flood risk. Yeah, it's a complex one, but at the moment I'm struggling with this one.
Thank you. Before I speak, Councillor O'Leary, if you do manage to get a seconder, would you be prepared to have a form of words that I could put to the officers as your proposal is against the officer's recommendation? You have some time now to do that, but I will like to ask you to speak as well. You put your hand up. Thank you.
Yes, Chairman, I'm not backing down. I'm carrying on because I strongly believe this. Councillor Christopher may have been born in Weymouth, but just because a horse is born in a stye, it doesn't make it a pig. And in regards to expert opinion, we're a country governed by elected representatives, not experts. It's my job as an elected member, accountable to residents, to make a decision based on opinion, both expert and my own. If not, we wouldn't have planning committees or councillors. We would just have professional experts making all of our decisions because they're the experts. And if Councillor Christopher is a good friend of mine, but if he ever says another thing that he disagrees with an officer opinion, I remind him that they are the experts and we're to go by them. This building, by its very being, is a conservation eyesore, and it wouldn't be granted permission compared to when it was first built. It was on the site of a beautiful market building, and it has since then just become more and more run down and dilapidated. And I didn't say or infer that only Weymouth members should have a say on this. I said that Weymouth members will likely or will have a different opinion than non-Weymouth members, and that appears to be the case. So, I mean, thank you, Chairman, for trying to clarify it, but I didn't say anything of the such, because I would be very interested to know how many members, obviously Councillor Kimber and probably Councillor Roper has, but how many have recently gone down there, looked at the building and thought, my goodness me, this is definitely a flood risk, because I can assure you, I'll take some of you down there, and it certainly is not an immediate flood risk. If that's a flood risk, then I shall be leader of the Liberal Democrat group by the end of the month. That's how strongly I feel this one. So, Chairman, I'd love a seconder. And if I can get a seconder, I'm happy to provide you some words.
I think there's a very high tide tomorrow. Councillor O'Leary, would you like me to get your application form ready? I do believe the reference to animals are probably not appropriate, so hopefully that won't be minuted. Before we move on, Councillor Bell, I'd like a comment from our legal representative, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add some clarity to some comments about how the decision is being made today, just to remind members that this decision is being made by Dorset Council in its role as the local planning authority and not members standing in that position. And so because of that, it isn't just based on opinion. We are subject to the legal parameters for making that decision. So we have to make this decision by looking at the development plan first and then judging the material considerations as have been set out in the officer's report. And we would be open to challenge if we are making it on the basis of unsubstantiated opinions.
Thank you for that, Hannah. I'd also just like to reiterate, we can only debate and approve or not the application in front of us, regardless of whether a different application would have gone through or not, depending on materials. I'm afraid that's not an issue with this application. We can only judge on the policies in force at the time, not that was in force 10 years ago, or might be in force in 5 years' time, or the fact that walls might be 20 foot higher. That we can't take that into account in this application. We also must take consultative responses as read. In my opinion, if members wish to argue about them, I think we might get into very sticky ground. Can I just, Councillor O'Leary, are you, oh, sorry, we haven't found a seconder yet for your proposal. Oh, sorry, Councillor Matt Bell as well. So bear that in mind, we haven't got a seconder yet. Councillor Matt Bell?
Thank you. Councillor Matt Bell, Radipole Ward. This one's really tough because we're looking at an individual application, but it's in our town centre. And we know and love the area as residents and as representatives of it. The individual application, we've heard numerous points about why it isn't the perfect application, but I'm satisfied that this would improve the street scene. It would fit in well with the street scene, far better certainly than the existing building. I do recognise the issues with window outlooks. I think that's certainly something that concerns me. With regard to the flood mapping, it's actually something I studied at university during my degree. I'm not going to go into the depths, as it were, excuse the pun, of how you come up with those maps and how they are produced, but they're certainly not back of a cigarette packet calculations. They are thoroughly thought about and thoroughly put together before those maps are produced. It's been mentioned already by the chairman that we have to act on the basis of what we know now, which I'm very conflicted about. I understand that is the function of this committee, but it's highly likely, in my opinion, and from previous releases of information from various organisations, that sea level rise is hopefully going to be mitigated in that part of the town. But obviously that hasn't commenced to a level to satisfy that at the moment. The redevelopment of this site is important to Weymouth. It's in a prime location. It's on a pedestrian route between the harbour side. Thousands and thousands of people gather in there throughout the summer and occasionally in winter, big events, and making their way through to the town centre. So it's certainly somewhere that needs to see that improvement to the outlook. However, I feel constrained by the expert advice regarding the flooding. And whilst I would, I'd like to see that street scene improved, I'm so torn on this, and forgive me for that, but I find it hard to ignore that flooding advice for this location, and whether there's something that can be done in future regarding a revised application or a new application that deals with that in some different way. I'm struggling to see what that could be. For that reason, I don't feel able to second Councillor O'Leary, but that is with great pain, because I would love to see the redevelopment of this part of town. But at this stage, given the expert advice, and we do need to take that on board, I don't think we can proceed with the application as it is.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. I have two more speakers, but 3, 4. I'd just like to make a comment here. I'm hearing members saying that there will be a much-needed improvement, but what we must consider is it still acceptable? Any improvement is better than nothing, but if it's not an acceptable improvement, the end product, then we need to consider that as well. So, in our eagerness to improve the town centre of Weymouth, I think we need to be careful on what we accept. Councillor Christopher, I think, was next, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Could we have the plans back on the screen? The proposed.
There were quite a few. Which particular slide? Did you make a sorry?
Main frontage.
Steve's just looking for that now, thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, are you happy, Steve? Sorry, have you got a question?
just a tiny bit of context, just to differentiate between the two plans shown to you here. The top one is the originally submitted plans that have now been superseded by the one at the bottom.
My point is that the Weymouth that people very often come to see is characterised by great character and charm. And I don't think that really is something that displays character and charm. It's really rather blank and not particularly attractive. I know not every block of flats is attractive, whether it happens to be in the old Soviet Union or indeed in Hove. And I know beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but I can understand why an officer would turn around and perhaps say that isn't totally appropriate for Weymouth by way of scale, mass and design, regardless of what is there now.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Christopher. Councillor Borden, please. And then I will shortly wrap up the debate unless there's any burning questions. I've got Councillor Roper and then there'll be Councillor Isink. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, Belinda Borden, I'm Regis in Charmouth. So I, yes, definitely agree with my geographer colleague, the other, just along from here, because we tend to see every aspect of things. And I am very, very sympathetic to the need for more housing and for the improvements that a proposal there would bring. But it's not, I think that possibly members could overcome the difficulties of flooding if there were more substantial evacuation plans and the other details that we've talked about. But coupled with the poor living conditions that the officer has drawn attention to, and the unacceptable design, and the relationship with other, with the trees, there are too many things that could be improved to offset the obviously very good benefits that redeveloping that area could bring. So I think I'm conflicted as well, but I still feel that we should support the officer's guidance on this one and not agree the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Borden. Councillor Roper, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Pete Roper, Portland Ward. It's another comment, I'm afraid, on the flood risk. As you can tell, I'm not local, but in 1998 I was caught up in floods in Royal Leamington Spa in Warwickshire. At that time it was known as a sort of once-in-a-lifetime event, and I can only say that although the water came only up to my knees, the flow rate was almost enough to knock me off my feet. So it was one of the most sort of terrifying experiences of my life. So I think that now that we've, in this particular application, as we've had a sort of a flood risk identified, I don't think that we can just ignore it. Also, to be consistent, we have refused an application this year because of the flood risk, and I think for the sake of sort of consistency, we need to refuse this application.
Thank you, Councillor Roper. Councillor O'Leary, I think you still seek a seconder on your proposal. Can I just let Councillor Isaac speak first, and then I will check to see if there is a seconder. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm so minded when I'm thinking about all the questions around this application and the fact that we're looking at a decision based on what's on the table today. And I'm just really mindful that when we approve buildings, no matter how keen we are for urgent improvements and to see improvements as soon as possible, we are actually approving a building for the lifetime of that building. And I don't usually that's specified somewhere in the details, but usually it's a 100-year time span. However you slice it, we're approving a building for the long term. And when I look at the issues within this, we're looking potentially at giving people terrible outlooks. for the next 100 years. So whilst I take on board the fact that there's improvements and a huge number of improvements offered by this, I don't feel like I can go along with dealing with the compromises. So I'd like to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation to refuse in line with the officer's report.
We'd still have Councillor O'Leary's proposal first, which does seek a seconder. I think we need to just get some formal wording for your proposal, Councillor O'Leary, that's acceptable to the officers. So if you could come forward with that now, if not, we'll adjourn for 5 minutes until we can actually come up with something acceptable. Then we'll seek a seconder to that proposal.
Chairman, you can't train a racehorse with no legs, so I think I'm going to withdraw the proposal, and from the bizarrest decisions I think I've ever seen.
Thank you, Councillor O'Leary. So that proposal is withdrawn. Do I have any alternative proposals, please? Councillor Northam.
Thank you, Chair. I share the words made by the views made by councillors, but I'm reluctant to. I'm trying to find a way to get more information on the table. If we take the points in order, the 5 points, I think we should be deferring, seeking more information. We're hung up on this flood risk, which is a big risk for Weymouth, but sitting tight is an option. And that was mentioned in the report. And I'd be interested to give the applicant the opportunity to respond to the velocity data, which I wasn't even aware was in the SFRIT. Number 2, the conservation. It's very subjective, and I'm sure that the officers was less than substantial harm was the phrase. So they're not saying substantial harm, and you can outweigh that by the benefits, and we listed the benefits that could potentially accrue. And the applicant has suggested that there's an alternative view which hasn't been considered. I think we need to give him the opportunity to put that forward. The overbearing aspects, they already exist in the existing flats to a large extent. 36A is the main one. It does have other windows and such like. And number 4, the flats unacceptable outlook into the light wells. The light wells are actually is used a lot in dense developments, light wells to bring light in, and in some very nice places as well. And the third-party trees, I don't see why that can't be dealt with by a condition, or at least give the applicant the opportunity to have that conversation with the landowner, who I think would view his development in a favourable light. It's the church who own the land adjacent because it's a churchyard. And similarly, with respect to the third-party trees, I believe that could be. And so I'd like to propose we defer and seek additional information from the applicant on those points. Thank you.
Councillor Northam, I think that we need to deal with the application in front of us today based on the application that's been put in rather than redesign it here or defer. I'll take advice on this in a minute, please. Could you just give me 5 minutes? Thank you. There's a point of order here. Apparently, Councillor Eysenck was quite able to put a proposal forward, and I actually overruled it. So I do apologise for that. I wasn't aware at the time that, because we still had a proposal on the table that hadn't been seconded. So Councillor Eysenck's proposal to refuse in accordance with the officer's recommendation stands first before the deferment proposal from Councillor Northam. So does Councillor Isenk have a seconder, please, to refuse this application in line with the officer's recommendation? Councillor Borden. So we'll deal with that one first, please. If it fails, then we'll go to Councillor Northam. Thank you. All those in favour of Councillor Isenk's proposal, seconded by Councillor Borden, to refuse the application in line with the officer's recommendation, please raise your hands. We have 7 for. Any against? 2. Any abstentions? 1 abstention. In that case, the proposal is carried. The recommendation is refused in accordance with the officer's recommendation. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 7, urgent items. There are no urgent items. And item 8, exempt business. There's no exempt business. Thank you all for your attendance. I will sign the minutes of the meeting in just a minute. The meeting is now closed at 12:05. Thank you very much.